dressed in this zombie hunter kind of cyberpunk outfit.
So he always seemed kind of like quiet, odd.
You couldn't miss the car. You couldn't miss the car.
Next thing you know, we're meeting at conventions, parking his car. He's with the people from The Walking Dead. It's that ironic.
Off the pages of a Jules Verne novel. It's actually part of a trend known as steampunk.
The Arizona Steampunk Society, Phoenix FearCon, the Renaissance Festival. Bryan Patrick Miller's life revolved around fantastical costumes and alternate realities. His social media reflected the same, using words and phrases like the zombie nut house, we kill him dead, and an obsession with, quote, the steampunk aesthetics and the technology with it. In pictures and video, he portrayed his character as almost a hero.
He also had a lot of photos. You can go to his Facebook pages with the law enforcement. So his car's always with a Maricopa County Sheriff. He's posing with police guys.
For some, there's a fine line between fantasy and reality.
Her normal routine was to be gone approximately an hour and a half to complete the circuit. He was concerned when she didn't show up.
November 1992. Angela Brasso had gone out for her usual evening bike ride along the canal. Nothing was out of the ordinary until she didn't come home.
The gentleman that is usually fishing at the canal there drove by on his bicycle and said he thought he saw a head there that everybody was looking for, and he kept riding his bike. So we decided to go take a look, see if it was really the head. From a distance, it didn't look real, is what it was. But when we went down the steps and took a better look at it, real close-up look, and it was the head, basically.
Her body found in a separate location along the canal. It was Angela Brasso. A gruesome murder of a girl. No one could understand why Angela would be targeted.
She was on the dean's list all 8 trimesters of her college. She's just a super kid. That's all, just a super kid. And it should have never happened. It's tough enough for me being a family friend. You just cannot imagine the hurt and the grief that goes on with the parents. You just can't imagine.
Her bike was missing, and there were no hits on a DNA match. To their knowledge, there were no witnesses, something they desperately needed in this case.
The best homicide detective in the world will not be able to solve a case without that piece of the puzzle.
And he was right. They couldn't finish the puzzle. There were too many pieces missing. All family and friends could do was wait and hope. What came next was certainly a possible clue, but not the clue anyone wanted, and fear set in.
It was pretty sorrowful. There's people going around crying. There's a lot of counseling going on. A lot of people just pretty much just went to the counselors to seek help, just deal with it.
10 months after the murder of Angela Brasso, another girl gone. 17-year-old Melanie Burness of Arcadia High School found dead along the canal too. Angela was riding her bike, so was Melanie.
We all loved her, she was really cool. I don't know what the motive is. I'm so confused. I really want to know, why,
Everyone was thinking the same haunting thought. Could they have been killed by the same person?
There's some guy out there, and you don't know where he is. He might be one of your mom's best friends or whatever.
I don't come out here anymore unless I'm with somebody.
Something unusual was found at Melanie's murder scene, though. A blue bodysuit that wasn't hers.
Police also found another clue along this canal last September, but they kept it to themselves until tonight. The clue? A piece of clothing, which police say did not belong to Melanie Burness, but it might belong to someone who knows her killer.
Someone could be able to identify this particular item of clothing as something that had been taken from them in the past in a burglary or a theft, or maybe someone was in the area of the Burness homicide when it occurred and saw someone that had this particular article of clothing in their possession.
Then, a bombshell discovery. DNA found at Angela Brasso's murder matched the DNA found at the Melanie Burness murder scene.
And what that tells us is that there is an individual who is at both homicide scenes. And that's really all it tells us. It doesn't say that that individual even is the killer. What it tells us is that a same person was at both homicide scenes and had contact with both victims.
Phoenix police had the DNA, potentially the DNA of a serial killer who brutally took both girls' lives, but no hits on who it belonged to. No leads and no new information for more than a decade. Both cases grew cold, and the once headline canal murders faded away in everyone's minds.
It was suspicious that they would call Phoenix police at 262-6141.
Police didn't know it at the time, but that DNA belonged to a man with a dark history. A man who was convicted of stabbing a woman as a teen and who was acquitted of stabbing a woman in his 20s. Bryan Patrick Miller would also be in another spotlight, one shining on unsolved cases spanning several states. A worst-case scenario no one could stop until somebody did. Huntington Beach, California, undoubtedly one of the most popular places on the West Coast. Scenes like this, a quick drive from Colleen Fitzpatrick's house. She's lived here for over 30 years. Her work goes far beyond the place she calls home.
I've worked actually forensic genealogy cases in 53 countries.
What is genealogy?
The study of family history, family names, family pedigrees.
Genealogy has rocketed in popularity over the last 5 years. Ancestry.com, 23andMe, Family Tree. People all over the world are discovering their past and long-lost relatives with this growing science. Adoptees have found their birth parents. That spurred an idea.
In about, I'd say 2010, I became aware that it could be applied to cold cases because a John Doe or a Jane Doe or an unidentified assailant, that's the same as an adoptee. You don't know who they are, you don't know their parents, but you can use DNA to find out.
Colleen was in Phoenix for a symposium on human identification. It's there she met some Phoenix police detectives.
One of the detectives said, well, we have a case we may be sending to you. And several weeks later, they sent me the Y DNA profile from the crime scene for the Phoenix Canal murders.
Remember, they had found matching DNA at both the Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness crime scenes. But with no leads on whose DNA that was, they decided to let Colleen take a crack at it with genealogy, a practice completely non-traditional, with no proven results it could really even work.
I've been involved in cases that we solved in 2 hours, and I've been involved in cases that we've solved in 2 years.
Colleen took that Y profile from the Canal murders DNA and used it with software she and her team created.
So we entered the numbers from the forensic profile into our software, we did the search, and that's where I came up with 6 matches to the name Miller.
How can DNA from one person be an exact match to 6 different profiles?
You can do that because it's only the Y DNA. In other words, everybody in that family along the direct Miller line will have that same Y DNA.
This was a huge investigative lead. Before this, there were about 2,000 potential suspects in the case. Police had a hunch there may be somebody in town that could be a match, but it would take an undercover operation to get a swab of his DNA and send it to the crime lab to see if it was a match. Colleen hadn't thought much about it until she got a call from detectives.
Troy Hillman rang in and he says, "We're right, that's right. Bryan Patrick Miller, we've arrested him and you were right." And at that moment, I went, oh my God, they got him.
Phoenix police detectives were able to obtain a DNA sample.
It's amazing to me that after so many years, exactly one word cracked that case, and the word was Miller.
He never seemed like the type of person to do that. I mean, he was always nice to me. You know, I just can't fathom it.
It sounds odd when someone like us in this situation express love for this person, because due process and everything, our heart goes out to the families. It's the worst nightmare.
Shockwaves ran through the valley in January of 2015. The search of Bryan Patrick Miller's home began, a hoarder home. Did anybody really know the zombie hunter?
I think hoarding was enough. Did they really need to go zombie hunter? You know, you just go, I mean, you're making the guy out to be a complete loon. He's a complete loon.
All while the case is unraveling, Colleen is in California, told to stay silent.
How has genetic genealogy changed or improved since you made that discovery back then?
It's exploded. Now, genetic genealogy and forensic genetic genealogy has exploded.
Colleen has now cracked countless other cases in the same way since. But it's this case that helped her find her purpose.
How did that make you feel as a genealogist, knowing that not only what you do works, but that you just helped families who were looking for answers for so long about what happened to Angela and Melanie?
I feel sometimes I've arrived because I can take all of that education, all of that background, all of that experience, and really help people directly.
This case has been stuck in the middle of its own story for over 5 years. Colleen's chapter of this story may be over, but the book is nowhere near finished.
It had a beginning, it has to have an end. Yes, you have to turn the page and close the book.
The story doesn't end with Angela and Melanie. Their murders unraveled a dark past.
This is what happened.
They were sure of it.
Without doubt. They said, you don't need to wonder anymore.
You don't know what's in their mind. You don't know what's going to trigger them to do something that they do. I remember when the cases were brand new, when they first occurred, I was a sergeant in our media relations department, and those two homicides truly rocked the valley. I mean, they were horrendous. These types of serial crimes, these types of serial killers in this case, or be it a serial sex offender, they're really hard to predict. Just a character that they happen to take on. Sometimes it's not too different from who they actually are.
Could Bryan Patrick Miller be a serial killer? Angela Brasso was decapitated. Melanie Burness was found brutally murdered. Bryan Patrick Miller has been charged in their deaths. But even with those facts, Kevin Robinson says it's not a clear-cut answer.
You don't know what's in their mind. You don't know what's going to trigger them to do something that they do. The person has a great deal of anger when they're committing the crime itself. The question I would think is, why are they that angry? What's causing them? What's triggering that episode? What's triggering that level of violence on that particular victim?
Robinson has 36 years of experience in policing. At one point, he was the assistant chief heading up the investigations unit at Phoenix PD. That includes homicide. He says Bryan Patrick Miller is hard to figure out. Why? Well, he was the zombie hunter, posing with officers. We don't know who he truly is.
People like that are wannabes. They're not able to do certain things, so they adopt a different persona. It most definitely complicates things from a standpoint of trying to understand this individual more completely.
Here's what we know about Bryan Patrick Miller's past. In his teens, he stabbed a woman near the Paradise Valley Mall before the Canal murders and pleaded guilty to attempted second-degree murder. In 2002, police charged him with stabbing Melissa Ruiz Ramirez in Washington, but he was acquitted, claiming self-defense. Another Washington woman, Victoria Mickelson, went to Phoenix police years after she was stabbed in the stomach and neck when she was 14. Victoria told officers she was nearly 100% sure Bryan Patrick Miller was her attacker. But to date, Washington officials haven't filed charges in that case.
I know there's some speculation about some other victims because of the neighborhood and some unsolved crimes.
One in particular, the disappearance of a teenage girl that nobody has forgotten. 13-year-old Brandy Myers.
In your mind, how sure are you that Bryan Patrick Miller killed your sister?
I don't have a doubt in my mind. And the Phoenix Police Department put that to rest in my mind.
At the time, did you feel safe?
I was blissfully unaware, but I didn't know it was dangerous or the hood, you know, we just played like it was anywhere else.
Brandy and her family lived in the Sunny Slope area, just 3 blocks away from Miller. Brandy and her little sister, Kristen Dennis, would pass by his house every day walking to school, though they didn't know who Miller was. In May of 1992, Brandy was out in the neighborhood asking for donations for a book-a-thon when she seemingly vanished into thin air, and for decades, there were no answers. Until Bryan Patrick Miller's arrest for the Canal murders in 2015.
When he was arrested, people started coming out and telling us stuff. So his ex-wife, Amy, came forward and gave us these confessions that he made to her during their time that they were married. She tells the police, he tells me the story about a girl who came to his door. And when she knocked at the door, he saw it as a perfect opportunity to act. He pulled her in the house, started stabbing her. She was alive for all that, and then he slit her throat and killed her, and that's what killed her.
Brandy's body has never been found. Police tell Kristen the story doesn't stop there.
So he's like, okay, I gotta get rid of this body, and he cut her up in pieces. So he just dismembered my sister, like something of no importance, put her in black trash bags, and my sister just went to the landfill.
And these are all details that police told you from that interview with his ex-wife?
Yes.
Kristen wanted to visually show people how easily this could have happened solely based on location and the route they always walked.
This was our house. We would go this route to get to school, and this is where Bryan lived. This was where she was last seen. This house was not home, and this house she never made it to. It finally makes sense. It finally tells me like why she didn't come home, why we never found her body. Exactly like, look at this man, everything adds up.
Police believed there was enough circumstantial evidence for a conviction. Months after Miller was arrested for the murders of Angela and Melanie, Phoenix police recommended first-degree murder charges against him in the presumed death of Brandy Myers. But so far, the county attorney's office has declined to prosecute him for Brandy's murder.
I can't just let it go. I wish I could. I do. I wish I could just let it go, and I can't. I keep trying. Every time I'm knocked down, every time they turn down the case, I'm like, you know what? What am I doing?
Kristen hopes the momentum in the Canal murders case as the trial looms will help Brandy's case too. It's been 29 years since she lost her sister. She wants to look Bryan Patrick Miller straight in the eyes in a courtroom.
I want a chance to say, you know what? You took everything from me, and I was lost for years. But you know what? You don't have power over my life anymore.
I have to say this to clients all the time. You know, when you watch Law and Order, at the beginning of the episode, some jogger in Central Park is tripping over a body. And at the end of the episode, you know, Jack has his conviction. In real life, you know, that doesn't take an hour. In real life, that's, you know, typically 3 or 4 years.
It's been 6 years since Bryan Patrick Miller was arrested. All documents in the case are now sealed, which means we can't see anything until it comes out in court. The trial will set a precedent no matter the outcome.
There's a lot of interesting issues in this case. The first and the most obvious one is the forensic genealogy.
Will a judge uphold that practice as being legal, as being credible? If so, it sets the tone for any forensic genealogy findings moving forward in the United States. But now, Bryan Patrick Miller's team has planned an insanity defense. We asked criminal defense attorney Russ Richelsoff to look at the case. He's not connected to it in any way.
So with insanity, what we're interested in is what was his state of mind at the time he committed the offenses.
Could he understand the nature of the wrongfulness of his acts?
This isn't a cookie-cutter case. The laws have changed since 1992 and 1993 when Angela and Melanie were killed.
The law that applies is the law that was in effect at the time the crime was committed, which in this case was, almost 30 years ago. If the defendant proves by clear and convincing evidence that they were insane, they did not understand the nature and wrongfulness of the acts at the time that they committed them, then they're essentially not guilty.
In this day and age, a full sentence would still be served somewhere, whether that be prison or in a mental health unit. But with crimes of insanity back in the early 90s, it was different.
If they were required under the criminal statute to serve 20 years in prison, they would be placed in a secure mental health facility for 20 years. Under the old statutes, it's reviewed, like I said, about every 6 months.
According to Richelsoff, that means if Bryan Patrick Miller were to be found insane at the time of the crimes, he would be placed in a mental health facility, but would have the opportunity to be re-evaluated every 6 months. If he was deemed better and mentally sound during any of those reviews, then he could be set free, even if he's proven to have committed these murders.
At the same time that the defense noticed insanity as a defense in the case, they also requested the court to do what's referred to as a Rule 11 screening, to screen this person to see if they're competent to stand trial. Competency is concerned with his mental health now. Is he capable of effectively communicating with his lawyers? Does he understand his constitutional rights?
Richelsoff expects the prosecution to try and relate to the jury to win them over, proving the zombie hunter isn't one of us.
The prosecutor is going to probably try to portray him as a weirdo. Hey, here's what this person was into. That's really weird. They're not like us. The defense is going to portray it exactly like, he'd like to dress up for Halloween. This is what he liked to do on the weekends. It was, some harmless fun. It's easier for the jury to convict somebody if the jury doesn't identify with them.
Time is the big factor here. The wheels of justice, they grind slowly.
A trial of this magnitude will likely last months. There's a possibility new details could link Miller to other crimes and other victims. This trial will set a precedent moving forward for genetic genealogy. If it can solve these murders, how much more can it solve? The possibilities are endless.